Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Archaeoastronomy is one of the most intriguing and hotly debated aspects of prehistory. Our forebears left us tantalising evidence of their understanding of the cosmos and their relationship with it all over the world, from South America to Asia, Africa, Europe, to the Wiltshire Plains and Stonehenge, and of course the Calanais Standing Stones way up in the Hebrides. Professor Roberto Trotta knows a thing or two about the stars and the galaxies. He's a cosmologist at the International School for Advanced Studies in Trieste, where he's Professor of Theoretical Physics, and he's a visiting Professor of Astrostatistics at Imperial College London. However, recently he's turned his attention to prehistory as well, and his recent book, Starborn, has explored a thought experiment, asking the question, what if our ancestors had never seen the stars? That simple question revealed to him just how crucial to our ancestors their relationship to the cosmos was in prehistory. And that's why we're talking to him now. Roberto, welcome to you. It's a pleasure and an honour indeed to have you here on our show.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. Well, you're looking good. I presume you're well, etc., and the world is treating you well, or the cosmos is treating you well.
Yes, well, if we ignore whatever else is happening in the world, but the cosmos is all right so far.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. We have to think, be grateful for these mercies. Yes, it's true. We're thrilled to have you on again. A lot of our viewers know that that we had a brief chat with you a little while back for Calanais Conversations, and we said at the time that it was just an enthralling subject and we'd want to get you back on again. So really grateful that you've come on, especially at this time of the evening,
when the stars happen to be out.
Yes, not here. It's a very cloudy, rainy night here. But Roberto, the first thing I want to ask you to get the ball rolling, give people a bit of a potted history about what actually brought you, to be a cosmologist apart from anything else, but what brought you into cosmology and then ultimately, into this frame of reference, if you like, that you've been exploring with Starborn, because it's a fascinating area.
Like with many things in life, it's sometimes a question of sliding doors. These moments when you make one decision and then it leads to another, and then before you know it, you're considering what would have happened if we had never been able to see the stars. And I went to university and studied physics. I was interested in science. I was interested in physics because I thought physics was perhaps one of the most fundamental building blocks of our knowledge of the universe. And then astronomy, of course, was also a very fascinating subject for me, always has been. Although I wasn't, a boy with a telescope or anything like that, but I was interested in the stars. I didn't know much about it. And about midway through my undergraduate course in physics, I had the opportunity to take part in an astronomy camp organized by ETH, at Zurich, the university, Polytechnicum I was at. And so we went out in the Swiss mountains. This was in Zurich at the time. We went out in the Swiss mountains in February, dreary cold, minus 20 degrees and meter and a half of snow. And but unfortunately, the clouds were there. So our observations, I planned to look at a binary star and measure the period, the usual sort of undergrad type of stuff that you would do as training exercise. But the clouds prevented all that. And so the professor said, well, actually, we can't see any stars, but you can still look at the sun through clouds. You can look at the sunspots or whatever. It's good enough for the purpose that we are here. But one thing only, remember, never ever look through the telescope at the sun through a telescope, because that's a mistake you'll only do twice in your life, once for each eye. Fair enough. And so we set it up. We cleared the place from the snow. We set up the telescope, and I'm pointing this telescope at the sun, which is the biggest thing in the sky, except together with the moon, obviously. And I'm trying to get the sun to project onto the piece of paper on the other end of the telescope, so you can observe it in safety. And I can't I can't aim the thing, I'm so useless. I can't even get the sun, properly aligned with the telescope. And then in a moment of frustration, I do what I was told absolutely to avoid. I bend down and I look through the eyepiece.
Oh my God.
Looking for the sun. Where is the sun? And the moment a fraction of a second later, I realized my mistake. I'm like, this is not a good idea. And, I immediately jerked back. And then I realized what it was that saved my eyesight. It was my ineptitude, because I discovered that the lens cap was on all the time.
Well, thank God for that. Wow.
Thanks God for that. But that's the moment when I realized I'm not going to be an astronomer. This is not what I'm cut out for. And so from there, I went on to do theoretical physics, and from there, theoretical cosmology, which was data-driven.
Was that at Oxford, Roberto?
Oxford as a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society at that point. Before that, I did a PhD in cosmology, and then I went to Oxford for 3 years, where I continued my research in the primordial universe, which was data-driven, but the data were on a computer screen. So I didn't spend much time early in my career looking through a telescope, but later on, I got interested in a few years back. I got interested into the question of, the real thing, the sky that you can actually see apart from pixels on the screen. What does that do for us, for me, and for humankind?
Yeah. Now, obviously, we're skewed towards prehistory, and I know there's lots and lots, we could talk about in a much broader field, because we'll probably get on to, if time allows, some of your current day passions as they stand at the moment. But sort of easing into, I don't know where to begin with this. What took you to Calanais? What took you to this thought experiment about prehistory and the past? They all seem sort of wrapped up together. Are they sliding doors?
Yes, of a kind. Yes, yes. Calanais is very important for me personally, for the book as well, and for my thinking about these issues. And I'll come to that in a minute. But maybe the previous step in that journey, fast forward to about January 2020. In fact, just before the world changed and stopped for a number of months and years, I was giving my inaugural lecture as astrostatistics professor at Imperial College London. And that's an occasion where newly minted professors actually get to present their research, but also a little bit their path and how they got to be where they are and what inspired them and so on. And so I got to reflect on the fact that without stars, my profession wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be a cosmologist, because we wouldn't know about the existence of the universe. And that thought led to the wider consideration of what the stars have done, not just for me personally, of course, a great deal, but in my personal trajectory in life, but also for us as a whole, as humankind. And when I was at Calanais, around that time, this was February 2020, I believe. Yeah, that was the last trip I did before everything shut down. February 2020, I was in Calanais.
But how were you drawn to Calanais anyway, in the first place?
Because of my public engagement work, the Dark Skies Festival takes place every year on the island, and I was invited to present my work. I had the opportunity to visit the site on a dreary February day. The sky was fully cloud covered, of course, and the wind was blowing, and I was the only visitor apart from a single sheep that was grazing nearby, which is very magical. Actually, it was special, despite the conditions, or perhaps because of the conditions. And I didn't know anything about Calanais. I'll be honest, I didn't know anything at all about its importance, history, nothing. But when I was there, I was struck by this profound, deep sense of meaning. I mean, this place, although I couldn't see the stars at the moment in time, it was clear to me as I was standing there, as I was walking down the aisle, the long alleyway, and standing near the central menhir, and considering the purpose and the meaning now lost. I mean, not all of the meaning is lost, but certainly the purpose of the builders, that the builders intended, is now largely difficult to reconstruct. I was struck by the fact that it was self-evident to me that this place and this monument and this effort had something to do with the sky. And if the sky was so powerful to compel our Neolithic ancestors to spend so much effort, so much energy into building such an incredible monument, surely the sky must have had a huge importance in their life. And that is what led me to, delve deeper into that question. What has the sky done for us?
I'm just going to interject to give a plug to Starborn as far as this is concerned,
yes.
because I was really struck by your evocation of your visit at that time to Calanais. Sent shivers up my spine, I have to say. Roberto is a very fine writer. His book is successful, for more reasons than one, and it's just a pleasure to read. So I'm looking forward. I haven't completed it all. So I'm looking forward to
thank you, Mike.
the rest of it. Yeah. So So that combined, and I suspect at the root of it is not just the inspiration from Calanais, but I think there's an awareness of the current situation where we are becoming disconnected from the stars. Is that's another part of the equation that inspired you to write Starborn?
Yes, very much so. That the paradox of our time is that the stars are receding behind these, not only the glowing lights of our cities, where hardly anybody can ever see the stars. I did this experiment when I was researching the book. I went out to Wimbledon Common in South London, and I tried to look at the stars in the orange glow of the city, and there were just a handful, really. And no surprise that we don't connect with them anymore. We don't care about them anymore from a cultural perspective, but also from an ecological perspective. And perhaps we can come on to that in a minute. So the paradox of our time is that, as the real sky recedes and we hardly ever have this experience of the importance of the night sky, of the lunar cycles and so on, we can get beamed to the furthest corners of the universe through few clicks, because we see these amazing high-definition, high-resolution images from Hubble Space Telescope and now the JWST and many others. But the real experience of what the sky actually is like, the dark sky, the night sky is like, the experience of the sublime, as Emerson put it, is forever escaping us now, and hardly anybody has got the opportunity to actually re-experience the sky as countless human generations have in the past, and that to me is a big loss.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there's so much of culture today. The fact that people don't have any downtime. We have electric light the whole time, so people spend the evenings, whether it's in front of the television or whatever, that there isn't actually, culturally, we don't have that relationship with being outside and just spending time with the night sky. It's been that way for quite a long time now, hasn't it?
Quite a long time, and yet quite a short time if you look at it, from a
in historical terms, absolutely,
perspective, right? And there is a classic book, The Midnight Sky, published in 1878 in London, where the sky in various seasons and various times of the night is presented in beautiful plates, hand-drawn plates. And this is 1878 in London, and the text says, those are the constellations, and which cannot be unfamiliar even to the most casual of observers, because people in central London, there are plates showing the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral with a streak of the Milky Way above it, as an ordinary sight.
Yeah.
In central London, right? And
it is astonishing. In fact, something that I've commented on before, and it would be all too familiar with you, that it was a huge shock to me years ago. I have always been the boy with the telescope, but when I found out that the whole of the Messier catalogue, that Messier compiled the whole catalogue of deep sky objects with a telescope, that it was a 2-inch refractor, so about the size of the telescope that you would buy for a child for Christmas. And you can't see, there's a handful of those things that you can see with the naked eye now. And in fact, most of them you couldn't see. I mean, you'll struggle to see, even with a 10-inch telescope, you'll struggle to see some of them. And so that shows how much that our night skies have changed since Messier compiled that catalogue, which is, it's not even 150 years, is it?
Yeah.
Roughly, something like that, which is quite shocking, really.
Yeah.
So what was What was the process that led to the thought experiment that's at the root of Starborn, of imagining us never having seen the stars?
Part of it was, I guess, the outcome of spending 15 years in England, where sadly
It's not that bad.
No, it's not that bad. I'll give you that. But since I moved to Italy, the contrast is immense, I must say. But joking apart, this idea that I think the root of was seeded into me by that day at Calanais when it was covered. The sky was covered in clouds, as it usually is in the
Hebrides.
Island in sort of in February. Lewis Island in February. To me, the idea that seed came from the fact of considering, despite the difficult conditions, obviously the night sky was so important to our prehistoric ancestors to build that incredible monument, and it was just one step away to think about what would have happened. Would we be here if it wasn't for the stars at all? And when you start asking this question, imagining a world exactly identical to our own in every respect, except for one consequential detail, namely the fact that you can't see the stars. I mean, the stars are still there, the moon is still there, but say nobody has ever seen them. Nobody has ever imagined even the disk of the sun. There is an alternation of day and night, but nobody knows quite where it comes from. Nobody sees the phases of the moon. And if you starting this question, well, what would have been different in today's society and knowledge? Well, then a host of things immediately come to mind. Timekeeping. All the early calendars were lunar calendars, of course, and sundials, of course, relied on shadows cast by the sun and so on. Navigation by the stars, the longitude determination, all the rest of it. Astronomy, which French mathematicians and physicists Henri Poincaré called the midwife of science, would not have existed, and without astronomy, physics would never have taken off, and without physics, arguably none of the sciences. And so our technology-driven life today would not exist. So all of those things are fairly, not obvious, but there's a clear connection that the book also pursues in detail, sometimes in unexpected ways. But then, to me, the really interesting thing came when I started asking myself the question, well, how far back does it go? Well, the Egyptians surely knew a lot about the stars. They cared about directions because they lined up the pyramids in certain ways and so on. But what about further back? What about prehistory? And that to me was an enormous discovery, because I hardly knew anything about prehistory. I still know very little. I tried to read. I did read a lot about what was the state of the art, about what is known about prehistoric interest in the sky. And of course, as we know, traces are very, very difficult to interpret. Prehistoric traces are but a smattering of bones in a cave, or very indirect signs of what people were up to, and certainly very, very indirect ways of understanding how they even understood their relationship with their environment. And in particular, somebody looking up at the Pleiades in the sky, or looking for Venus at sunset. These are cultural practices that leave no trace in the fossil record, and how do we actually can hope to reconstruct what they were up to? But I became convinced by doing all of this research, and also looking across in parallel sort of anthropological research, anthropological evidence from contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, which perhaps have some of the same challenges to face as our prehistoric ancestors. I became convinced that the stars have a lot to answer for in terms of why are we here.
Brilliant. I've just been looking at the chat a little bit. I think we've got several people who've just ordered copies of Starborn, so that's a win.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Very good. No questions so far. I haven't really been paying attention to the chat. Sorry, Rupert, go ahead.
One of the things, excuse me, one of the things that I've found really fascinating is where you were correlating the Australian Aboriginal myths of the Pleiades with Western traditions as well. Talk a little bit about that, because it's a fascinating thing for people to hear.
Yeah. That to me was a moment when I found out about this, that it was really arresting, shall we say, because it's a connection that still takes my breath away, and I put it out in the book as a hypothesis, or as a hypothesis, which for which of course we cannot properly ever have the hope of having firm proof. But here's the thing. One of the big mysteries is in prehistory, of course, as your followers will very well know, is why is Homo sapiens actually here at all? Because when we came out of Africa 50,000 years ago as the sort of new kid on the block, the Neanderthals had been around for something like 600,000 years, and they had every advantage over us. They were widespread in Europe. They had better, stronger physical makeup. They had also intellectual abilities that could rival our own, and so they could stand their own. They were masters of fire. They had arts. Probably they might have even buried their dead. So the Neanderthals were not, as it's now well recognized, those sort of brutes that were initially depicted to be 100 years ago or at the beginning of the 20th century. So the question is, how did they actually disappear? The Neanderthals, right? Because 42,000 years ago, they just disappeared. In a few thousand of years, they were all gone. And whatever happens, we certainly didn't club them to death, because a handshake by a Neanderthal could crush the bones in your hand. They were so much stronger than us. And so it wasn't by muscle alone that we took over. And so perhaps the stars have got something to answer here, and I became convinced that they do, and we can come back to why I think that is the case, that our supremacy, if you want to call it that, over the Neanderthal is in some part at least a reflection and a consequence of our better knowledge of the sky and better ability, our ancestors' ability to use the sky in a variety of ways, and we see traces of that in contemporary or at least historical hunter-gatherer Aboriginal societies, as you mentioned. But then I was looking for some sort of, if not proof, at least some sort of evidence of the fact that primordial sapiens was sky-savvy, as it were. And I came across this incredible connection, which is the story of the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, a beautiful group of blue stars in the sky, which are found not far away from the constellation of Taurus. And, if you look up now at this time of the year in a clear dark sky, you will not fail to see them, because they're not very prominent, they're not very bright, but they're clustered together. So it's like a box of jewels. It's a very beautiful constellation, not constellation, asterism. It's not a constellation, it's just a cluster of stars. And it's been recognized as such by essentially all cultures throughout history. And the thing is that all cultures recognize, or most cultures recognize this as seven of some kind. And oftentimes is a question of seven sisters or seven women in particular. And the tantalizing thing is that if you look at them with your naked eye, even in very, very dark sky conditions, you will ever only see 6 of them. So there is no seventh sister. And yet myth and legends across the world consistently talk about 7 stars. And there are a variety, every myth has got their own reason how the 7 sisters gotten lost, maybe because of she's been attacked by Orion, she's hidden in shame because of a divine rape, or fallen off the sky, or Muhammad took her down from the sky to earth. Different stories, different myth. Yeah. But in particular, there is an uncanny parallel between the story that is told about the lost 7th sister in ancient Greece, where indeed she was lost because of shame for the attack of Orion, and the exactly similar story that is told among Australian Aboriginal peoples before the arrival, and collected at the time of the arrival of the British around the 16th, 17th century. And the story is essentially the same. It's the same story, 7 women on the run, and one of them perishes because she's attacked by man or men hunting them down. And yet, these two cultures, ancient Greece and Australian Aboriginal cultures, had been separated for 50,000 years, or at least 35,000 years, let's say, because it is believed that Homo sapiens reached Australia 35,000 BC, more or less. And so obviously they didn't exchange stories in between. There was no connection between these two civilizations, except if you look at the astronomical facts, you discover that there are 7 stars in the cluster. We can see them there's many more in fact, but there is a 7th star, which is now too close together with another star to be discernible by the naked eye. So indeed they appear as one, and so it looks like as if there are 6. There is actually 7, but 100,000 years ago, because of the way the stars move, that 7th star was far away, sufficiently far away, so as to be easily visible and easily distinguishable by average human eyesight. And so the hypothesis is this, that maybe the histories and the stories and the legend and the myths about the 7th lost star, lost sister, arose 50, 100,000 years ago, before we left Africa, before our ancestors left Africa, and the distant echo memory of that story is still with us in the form of these stories and these myths and legends, which is, to me, just incredible.
Yeah. And it's so compelling. It's so compelling. It's, love it. Absolutely love it.
I think it's really important, at the root of the thinking is the advantage that would have been given to sapiens by paying attention to the stars. You mentioned briefly the timekeeping and the travelling, the navigation thing. Could we sort of unpack those a bit more? In what sense timekeeping? And first let's deal with timekeeping.
Yes, there are many layers of possible advantages that paying attention to the stars and the moon cycle gives. Primordial sapiens, but also all people who still, the few people, native and tribal people who still live according to traditional non-westernized ways of life, nomadic ways of life, or hunter-gatherers ways of life. And to us, that's very difficult to imagine because, like you were saying before, we're used to electric light and, we don't care about what's happening out there. But imagine this, the cycle of the moon, 29.5 days. The moon cycle, the moon comes back to be full every 29.5 days. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the full moon rises exactly as the sun sets, because obviously it has to be 180 degrees in front of the sun, which means that if you are a hunter-gatherer society and you're hunting down your prey, and one of the ways that we think our ancestors actually did that was by perhaps hitting the prey or wounding the prey and then stalking it to death and following it until it collapses due to exhaustion. And in fact, we are very, very good at that. We, our body is built for stalking, is built for long distance walking, long distance running, in fact. But if the sun goes down, then you lose your prey. Except these 1 or 2 nights in every month where the moon is full or nearly full, and then as the sun goes down, a perfectly fine torch comes up in the sky, and you can read by moonlight on a clear night. Yeah. So you can absolutely continue your hunting into the night, and the entire night is at your disposal to hunt, to get very nutritious meat, bring it back to the village, or to the, not village in this case because hunter-gatherers wouldn't have a village, but bring it back to the camp and then feast on it, and then perhaps have ritual feasting, maybe even ritual mating, all sorts of things regulated by the opportunities afforded by the full moon. And so if you somehow get to understand that this is not a happenstance, it's not a random event, it's something that every 29.5 days occurs regularly again, you can prepare for it, you're going to go out, you're going to get the meat, you're going to get better chances of having a nutritious meal, better chances of survival, better chances of mating, better chances of doing what our sapiens needed to do to overcome Neanderthals, spreading and growing and getting food. And so the cycle of the moon, there is very good evidence that it was fundamental for prehistoric societies in many ways, many more ways. There is tantalizing clues. I mean, the menstrual cycle is exactly the same as the lunar cycle for reasons that remain poorly understood. We don't know why that is. There are various hypotheses out there, but it seems plausible, at least on a cultural level, that the two things were synced, not by happenstance, either biologically or otherwise. The cycle of the moon also controlled the fertility cycle, and by that, the life of the tribe. And so, if you just think about this one aspect, timekeeping of that sort would give the sapiens huge advantages over the Neanderthals.
And I think that's the wonderful thing, I think, that you've outlined in Starborn. It is this huge gap between their fundamental relationship to the cosmos, even if it's only the moon in that regard, the menstrual cycle, and through the advantages it may have given through hunting, and to our complete disconnect. So it's very hard for us to appreciate, and it's sort of penny dropping for me, certainly, about reappreciating what folk back in the past were looking at when they looked into the sky.
Indeed.
And how contingent is that thing of noticing the match of the cycle, menstrual cycle to the moon, or noticing the advantage that the moon gives.
Yes.
Do you know what? I'm just going to throw something into the mix here. I don't know if you've thought of this before. It's what if the Neanderthal menstrual cycle was not in sync with the moon?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question.
It's they may not have.
And it's not just a biological thing, although of course there is this aspect, very important. It very quickly becomes a cultural matter as well, right? The fact that the moon, and we see this also in contemporary accounts of hunter-gatherer societies, that the moon becomes associated almost as the not the cause, but certainly the mean by which this hunt becomes possible and this thriving on it becomes possible, and therefore cultural practices associated with the feast that follows get associated with the moon, and that brings immediately us into the realm of spirituality and religious practices, or at least animism of some sort, whereby great powers get ascribed to the gods in the sky, because in all cultures, the gods in the skies, the planets, the stars, the constellations, the moon, the sun, those are the greatest gods, and not by chance. Not by chance, of course.
Do you know, that's a good moment to pick up. Klaus has commented, and in fact, Klaus asked this question the other day. We hadn't forgotten, Klaus, we were going to ask. But he said, isn't it pure projection that sapiens had superior knowledge of the sky? Why should Neanderthals and possibly other species who survived in the wild for 100,000 years would have been ignorant of the natural world around them, including the stars and the moon? And I know you have ideas on that. So.
Yes, no, that's a great question. That's a great question. And I'm not saying that the Neanderthals didn't know anything about any of those matters. Of course, like I said, they've been around for hundreds of thousands of years before sapiens arrived. And so they must have been, and they were extremely successful. But here's another... So, and I'm not saying this was quite so black and white. This is perhaps a little bit cartoonish if I present it that way. But we have to remember that when the Neanderthals disappeared, it was a time where climate swings made ice ages come and go very quickly, relatively quickly, over the period of hundreds of thousands of years. And again, this is not something that the Neanderthals hadn't seen before, because they'd survived plenty of ice ages before. And indeed, one could argue that from a physical point of view, they were better equipped than we were to withstand them. And yet, they did disappear. And so, but if you think about this in terms of competition for resources and what evolution always does, which is always giving a reward to whatever ever so slight evolutionary advantage, it might be the slightest, the smallest of things that might have given us the edge, which compounded over many generations, and at the time where resources were scarce, gave us the final advantage. And another less perhaps mechanical way in which we can understand this, or more not metaphorical, but more abstract way we can understand this. One of the hypotheses that experts make about why the Neanderthals disappeared is that it is believed that the Neanderthals somehow had more fragmented societies. They were less able to meet and had less opportunities to actually exchange cultural artifacts, innovation, technology, inventions, knowledge, because the scant fossil record we have gives evidence of more sheltered tribes that didn't exchange as much as sapiens did. Now the question is, why is that? And what might have favored our superior cultural capability of meeting at certain regular intervals and exchanging ideas. For example, the sewing needle. The sewing needle, as humble as it is, if you have access to that key piece of technology, when the ice age comes rolling around, you can fashion very warm clothes for yourself. You can cover your feet in sort of shoes and so on. You can create bags, and with bags you can carry food, you can carry children, you can carry babies. It's an immense invention. And yet there is no evidence that the Neanderthal knew about the sewing needle, which comes around after the Neanderthals, comes about after the Neanderthal disappearance. So, or it might well be that the Neanderthal did invent the sewing needle, but whoever invented it, the invention disappeared with him or her because they never exchanged the idea with other Neanderthals. And the contention is that perhaps what led sapiens to be better at exchanging this kind of ideas and technology was the fact that they had a better way of meeting up, of gathering for ritual feasts or exchanges of some kind. And in order to meet up, you have to set a place and a time. And that, again, requires knowledge not just of the stars for navigation, for example, for which we have evidence in practices of the Australian Aboriginal people that over land, for example, but also you have to set a time, because there's no point in being in the same place if you get there 3 months apart. Yeah. And again, we have practices in historical times of people who actually used the moon as a calendar, and the moon was the means by which the time, not just the location, but also the timing of the meeting was set. And so if that is not another way, an instrument that tells us, well, navigation and timekeeping capabilities would have led to superior socializing capabilities, and therefore a supercharging of culture, which is arguably what made the difference.
It is astonishing. I think it's an important point to make. This contingency thing, just the slightest tweak bifurcates into a huge advantage. I think you're a big fan of Stephen Jay Gould, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. I quote him quite extensively.
Yeah. And Stephen Jay Gould, another great science communicator.
Indeed.
Wonderful science. Wonderful Life is one of my favourites, I have to say. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't know where I was going with that. So
yeah, that's a dangerous rabbit hole. Just go.
Dangerous rabbit. Yeah.
There have been a number of comments on menstrual cycles not really being in sync with the moon, or every woman would be, following the same cycle. That's true, but there's an interesting aspect to this, and that was some research that was done some years ago now, where putting women into the same effective night and day cycle that actually brought them into a synchronicity. And I don't know if there was consensus over this research. It's just that it made me wonder that, again, because we now have our whole society and culture is based on not having to follow the cycles of night and day, that we can stay up all night with the lights on. And I do wonder if we did go back to living in an actual night and day cycle, if that would have a change on that. And that is just a thought. So don't shout at me saying "Don't be stupid, Soskin." I'm just
no. On the contrary, I take the points made in the chat absolutely, and I think those are all important points. And again, for the sake of brevity, I explain it in a slightly cartoonish and slightly black and white manner. And of course, it's much more nuanced than that. I did actually read quite a lot around this issue because I wanted to make up my own mind about this idea. Many experiments have been made. Does it really sync? And also related questions about, is there more babies born on the full moon or more suicide on the new moon? All of these kind of things. And I know my day job as a cosmologist, as an astrostatistician, where the key word is statistician, I was really interested in the data. And I've read a lot of this research. I'm not saying that is dodgy or anything but like that, but it's just that I wasn't convinced. At the end, there wasn't any strong evidence this way or that way, and it was small sample, it was different conditions, and try this and try that. I think you're right in saying that it's very difficult today to study with the methods of modern science conditions that were utterly different, hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you can set it up in a laboratory experiment, and you can lock up a group of women for a number of days in a room where you alternate but this is never going to be the same, right? So we can. There's a limited number of things we can scientifically say about this, but and I'm not saying. And so, in the end, I don't know. My upshot of this was that this wasn't scientifically proven in any way that it does line up, that they do sink. There is famous research made by a famous anthropologist, I believe, in the 70s, whose name escapes me, Linda. I forgot the name. It was a very famous paper at the end of the 70s claiming that there was a positively determined effect in that sense of linking up a menstrual cycle, which was later debunked and then later reclaimed. It's a little bit of a quagmire. Yeah. But the point just finishing this thought. The point I wanted to make about prehistory, though, in terms of like I say, in terms of science, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of this, and I don't think quite that we can reproduce in any meaningful way what the conditions were then, now, for all the reasons that Rupert mentioned. But I think in terms of the cultural stories that this can tell, consider this: there is a number of artifacts that clearly link, in prehistoric Neolithic times in particular, pregnancy, fecundity, and the lunar cycle with the womanly cycle. I don't think the coincidence of this length could not have escaped our ancestors, because they were so much more in touch with those kind of rhythms.
I think there's a baboon bone that has 29 cut marks along it, and Indeed. It seems to have been utilized, handled. I mean, you're the one that mentioned that, So it's not a question of whether, women are actually locked into the lunar cycle, whether people believe or not that they're associated. And as soon as they believe that things are associated, then they suddenly, that, has power to it.
It's worth saying here, Vicky made a comment and she said, I can't help but notice that they're all men. And that's absolutely true. We do need to acknowledge that fact. But I think also, excuse me, we shouldn't overstate this, because whilst it seems likely that this notched bone is going to be far more useful to a woman than it is to a man, we still don't know what it was used for, and it could have been a basic, Indeed. Calendar. We don't
Whatever
know.
It could. Yeah.
But
and that's what I was just about to say. Actually, Rupert. I mean, despite we started off, being attracted to stone monuments and stuff, and we've gone, 180 degrees, over the time years that we've been doing it. Yeah. We're much more fascinated, by people, but at the same time, we've got to pull ourselves back from assuming we can, get inside the mind of Neolithic man. Yeah. That's the danger. Yeah. But on the other side, this conversation and the things that you've pointed out, Roberto, do give insights in this, which are a solid ground to proceed upon.
And there's always this danger of projecting back our current understanding of the world onto prehistoric people, which of course will have had, for us, a completely unreachable way of understanding their place in the world. I totally appreciate that. And so I don't put any of these forward as scientific hypotheses as such, more as a way of understanding the cultural importance and potential impact that the stars, I'm convinced, have had at some level. Then we can debate what the right level was, but at some level they must have had a role in getting us where we are today.
Yeah. Very conscious of the time romping on. There is something I wanted to throw at you, and that's so you've mentioned the Pleiades and just quite how far back the story of the Seven Sisters could go potentially. But it's fascinating that the constellations, when you've just got these arbitrary groupings of stars in the sky, the fact that there are commonalities across cultures, and Orion is the big one, that in so many different cultures, it's to do with hunting, which might just be because of when it's present in the sky. That's the most likely time. But the fact that in different cultures, I mean, even in the Rig Veda, Orion is called Mriga, which means the deer. So it's always relating to the hunter or the hunted, and because we don't know literally how far back they go, but you do see it across cultures. You know, what's your thinking on quite how far back we might be able to take some of these arbitrary groupings of constellations?
Well, there is upper limits, as it were, to how far back we can go, based on the fact that on the one end, the precession of the equinoxes means that while the constellation shape doesn't change, the time when they're visible shifts through the years, and so we cannot, legends and myths that are associated with certain constellations, because they appear at a certain time of the year, that will be out of sync with the time of the year after a few thousands of years. But also there is investigations that have been made about the legends and stories being told about by the Australian Aboriginal people about how these constellations, when these constellations would be up in the sky, and how they would connect with natural events in the seasons. And the conclusion was that this couldn't be more than 5 to maximum 7,000 years old, because then they would go out of sync. And so if we stretch our gaze even further back in time, then over the timescale of several tens of thousands of years, then even the shape of the constellation begins to change perceptibly, because the movement of stars with respect to each other. And so really there is no telling what prehistoric people might have seen in the sky and how it would have looked like. I mean, we can probably go back in time and do a simulation of what it would have looked like, but there is no way of telling what they would have perceived in it. I think that would be really a fallacy for us to think, well, they would have seen a hunter. Who knows, right?
Well, it's how the stories are made, though, isn't it? That in fact, Mike and I were having this conversation earlier on. I said, if you go outside and look at Sagittarius, for example, that culturally, across the world, people refer to it as the archer, and yet you go and look at Sagittarius. At best, you're going to say it looks like a teapot, and so it just makes you wonder. Where the stories come from and why they come to be culturally standard, if you like.
Yes, but if you live in a society where nobody's ever seen a teapot, but everybody carries an arch, then perhaps
Yes.
not an arch. What do you call it?
A bow.
The bow. Yeah, the bow. Yeah. Then you see an archer in the sky, not a teapot, because that's why I'm saying that it's very difficult for us to ever go back into their mindset, because that's something that is really outside of our capability, I think, to ever reconstruct.
Yeah. It's I guess it's all about the stories that they were telling each other. That's the important thing, which is echoed in the Australian Aboriginal things. Then mnemonics for the narratives that they have, for the stories that they have.
Yes, the song lines. Yes,
the song lines.
Yes,
and finding their way.
Yes,
just extraordinary. Different aspect. And way of a possibility.
You raising that, just let me throw this one in. I'm sorry, folks, because I'm trying, but it's no way we can keep up with everything. But Dan has said, can you address the stars and travel? Sapiens seems to have travelled more intrepidly than Neanderthal and others, although perhaps not Erectus.
That's certainly true. Yes, that's absolutely true, because we know that the Neanderthals. We know so far as we know from the fossil record discovered to date, the Neanderthals were largely confined to Europe and perhaps some part of sort of Asia, but very very confined in this domain. While Sapiens reached Australia around 35,000 years ago. By means that are still, I guess, hotly debated, but it does seem to have been if not a plan, but certainly consider colonization of Australia. I mean, this is a hypothesis of the pregnant woman adrift on a raft. I think is can be discounted because the record does show that the number of sapiens increased steadily and quite rapidly over the course of a few thousand of years in Australia. But not only that, there is another big part that we haven't come upon yet, which is the colonization of sapiens, the expansion, let's say, of sapiens into the Pacific, which is one of the greatest feats of the great Polynesian master navigators, which, by comparison, the great navigators of antiquity, the Greeks all the Mediterranean peoples, they pale in comparison. As early as 4,000 years ago, the great master navigators in Polynesia were routinely traveling between New Zealand and Hawaii and Tahiti, covering 4,000 miles round trips, using nothing, no instruments, no maps, no charts, nothing except their immense knowledge of the swells, of the kind of fish that you found, the waves, the winds, the sky, and of course the stars. Yeah. And the famous star compass of the Carolingian master navigators is unparalleled, and they had legends and stories and names for nearly all of the 3,000 visible stars in the night sky. And so this is astounding, and knowledge that was then unfortunately largely lost due to colonization by Western people, and now it's making a comeback. Some of it has survived, and Polynesian people are going back to that tradition and trying to revive it, which is beautiful and very heartening.
Amazing.
I think.
Something I wanted to ask you, though, is skipping back a little bit, and I think it was about half an hour ago, you answered a question, and the last word in your answer was God, and or the gods, and the representation in the sky. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about this. Is that the people that were able to predict the rising and setting of stars, sun, moon, whatever, were able to claim relationship with the gods and therefore become godlike on the earth. I'm bringing us, forward into the Neolithic and the building of monuments and Calanais and things like that. I don't know if you've had any thoughts.
I think so, because of course in nature, and when you are largely at mercy of nature, as our ancestors must have been, you pay close attention to nature and you pay close attention to the gods, whether they are the gods of rain or the rivers or whatever else. But there is one very peculiar, I think, and unique aspect about the gods of the sky, which is their uncanny regularity, the sun cycle and the moon cycle and the stars coming around every year. Even the planets, which are a little bit more irregular and more, in fact, wanderers. That's what the Greek name planet, the Greek word from which planet is derived, means, the wanderers. Even the planets, of course, with their bright lights, were awe-inspiring. But the regularity of the heavens brings about this idea that the nature, everything around you can be chaotic. You might have rain, you might have wind, you might have animals coming and going, and different seasons and different things happening in a fairly chaotic way around you. But deep down, at some level, there is an order to this natural world, and that order is reflected in the cyclicity of the sky and the events in the sky. And that to me is key, and the fact that there is this cycle of nature, which is, however, sometimes interrupted by dramatic events like solar eclipses, for example, that thoroughly terrorized everybody in antiquity, of course, because it seemed like the principle of life was being obliterated, or comets, for example. Yeah. Destroying the order of nature, and therefore whoever was able to predict the orderly state of things and even forecast perhaps or understand the omen that these unforeseen events would bring down in this as above so below connection between sky and human world, well, those people would have been absolutely considered as special and therefore leaders.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about Stonehenge?
Oh, well, I've a little bit shied away from Stonehenge in the book.
We're with you, kind
we
of.
did for nearly 20 years.
Because I would say this. I found Calanais so much more fascinating in many ways.
Yeah, yeah, we're with you on that one, I think. Yeah,
it is a special one.
yeah.
Well, I'm very conscious of the evening having whizzed by, and Jill has made a comment. She said, in Australia, Orion is often called the saucepan. Are you sure you don't mean Ursa Major, Jill?
Yeah, Orion is a saucepan.
Because Orion looks more
That's
like a
interesting.
bow tie on its side.
Yeah.
But interesting. No, I. Do you know what? We're going to have to get you back on, Roberto, because you know it's just this. It could go down so many different angles. It's something that occurred to me actually. You talking about Neanderthals and humans having potentially having different relationships with the sky, and I did wonder that Neanderthals, you know, they've come through the Ice Age, more than one, and something that people tend not to consider coming out of an ice age is just how hot it actually is to melt all that ice. And so it makes me wonder if would there have been greater cloud cover because there would have been that much more evaporation going on. And if you're in northern latitudes for Neanderthals, as opposed to more southern climates for sapiens, where the skies would have been a little bit clearer, just tossing it out there, it's a possibility.
Perhaps. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time trying and failing to find a physical model for this alternative Earth that I call Caligo in the book. And then I just gave up because once you start playing around with the cloud cover and if you want to engineer that, then everything else gets out of kilt.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really work easily. And so I just come out at the beginning of the book and say, look, this is make pretend, right? And we're going to pretend that this is the case, but it's not. It's never a real physical system won't look like that.
Yeah.
Having said that, I did compare the sky knowledge of native Aboriginal peoples in Australia, where the skies are largely clear and therefore their knowledge of the sky is extensive, with the Inuit knowledge, the natives of the regions on the Arctic Circle, where instead the view of the sky is very, very poor. And it's very, very poor because, first of all, 3 months of the year you don't see the night sky because the sun is over the horizon all that time. So during the summer, you don't see the night sky at all. And during winter, of course, the weather is not very good, although the sky is almost always dark. You get often winds that blow up the snow and the ice particles, and that clouds the sky. Or even in nights of full moon, you get the full moon reflected off the ice, and that obliterates the sky. And indeed, you find that in Australia, Australian Aboriginals know legends about every single one of the 3,000 stars in the sky, while Inuit people in the Arctic Circle only knew the name of about a dozen stars and only recognized about 30 stars, which is very poor. But nevertheless, despite the paucity of available stars were very important to them too, for navigation purposes, for timekeeping purposes. They would drill a hole in the igloo in order to, during the Arctic night, and keep track of the stars to know when it was time to rise, because the night goes on 24 hours. Right. So even then, the stars are still important.
Yeah.
Winding up, the irony is that we wouldn't be where we are now if our ancestors hadn't taken notice of what was going on up there.
Yes.
That complexity, that appreciation, gave the ability to compute, to work things out. Without that aspect of it, we wouldn't be here. There is that. So it's an irony that here we are with computers and bright lights and AI, and we can't look up and see the stars that gave us that kind of gift in the first place.
Yes.
But what I wanted to do, Roberto, is just give an opportunity for you to air your current concerns and your hopes, for the future, as far as our relationship to the cosmos is concerned right now.
Thank you, Mike. And that's something that's very dear to my heart, because after going through this journey of discovering all of these hidden connections and mourning to a point the loss of them, of course, I'm happy that we live in a modern society with all the technology and the healthcare and all the good things that science has given us. But it is true that the very same science that has descended from the stars in many ways is now, in many ways, if not the science, the technology, threatening our very survival on Earth because of, climate change, first of all, but also loss of habitat and destruction of the very life support system of our planet. And the irony is, and the difficulty is, that this very same hyper-technological age in which we live now is looking at leaving Earth altogether, perhaps. You hear these people saying, we should go to Mars, we should colonize the stars, we should just leave this empty husk behind and just become a multi-planetary species and it's going to all be fine. Who cares about old Earth? And that is a very dangerous and thing to say, because it sets up the false expectation that there is another home out there for us. And that is simply not true. Earth is our only home. Is where Homo Sapiens makes their stand, and either we find a way of making Earth work not just for us as a species, but for all of the species on which our life depends, and the environment we're connected with. And I think that's really, really important. And if we look at the stars now as saviors, as a escape hatch, well, that's the wrong way of looking at the stars. And I think we would be much better served by looking at the stars as, once again, if we can, as a source of inspiration. And I want to perhaps mention in closing the overview effect. The overview effect being this psychological moment of change that many astronauts have experienced when seeing the Earth from space, going up there and looking at this beautiful blue marble that is our home, and seeing how vulnerable and small and beautiful it is when set against the deep darkness and the vicious darkness of a very inhospitable space. And if we could only recapture a little bit of that overview effect in reverse by looking up at space and the stars and understanding how small we are and how unique and special our place in the universe is, and understand in the long trajectory that brought us from prehistory and the fight with the Neanderthals to artificial intelligence, understanding how important it is that the future has to have the entire environment with us. We have to bring Earth with us and us with Earth forward. Otherwise, there is no future for us. Well, if the stars can help us understand that crucial point and this important moment in history, I think, well, then the stars will have saved us once again.
What a wonderful moment to bring the conversation to a close. Can't say more than that, Roberto. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We will get you back again if we may.
Anytime.
Yeah, come and have a chat.
Thank you very much. Yes, because I'm sure after this there's going to be an awful lot more questions coming in. So, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thanks for watching,
With that,
folks.
I'll say yes, ta-ra to you, and thank you. Thank you for our live viewers, those of you who turned up from Patreon. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your questions. And if you're watching the recording of this on YouTube, thanks for being with us. Thanks for watching. Do hit the like and subscribe button, and have a look at our Patreon page, and have a look at our Göbekli Tepe Stonehenge project page. Links down below. Thanks for that. That's all for now.
Take care, folks. Thanks a lot.
Until the next time.
Thank you.
Cheers.